All right. Hello and welcome to Creating a Villain Workshop. My name is KJ Harrowick. I am the co-founder of a company called I Know Why She Stayed and Authors Against Abuse. I'm also a fantasy and science fiction author. I love kind of blending the two together. So nice fantasy world with a lot of tech and, kind of weird elements. I've also created the Write It Club. I've helped create Writer in Motion. So I've kind of been in a lot of small different spaces around the community. But my heart really is, as much as I love heroes and heroines, my heart is really with the villains because there's something about watching somebody really struggle, trying to be a good person or trying to do something really right. And they're getting it all wrong all the time, and they just really make people's lives miserable. So, and they can be a lot of fun to write. So I looked up some different, what is a villain? Like AJ did a fantastic workshop yesterday, but she kind of covered a broad spectrum. But when I was creating this, I was really looking at how do different spaces around, the internet or in writer spaces, how do they define villain? And one thing I noticed is there's always this word evil, and when I think of evil, I think of this someone who's really just trying to cause pain, who's trying to cause chaos, who's just, and I've seen so many characters across movies and across books, and they're always calling them evil, and they're really not. They may do evil deeds or they may do harmful deeds, but they're not. The true definition of evil just doesn't really seem to come into play. So I wanted to give villains a little bit more of a modern perspective, kind of bring them into the future, I guess. So I wanted to reframe it. An antagonistic character or faction whose mission is really, really critical because our villains always have a mission. Their mission for control or to fix a perceived injustice creates chaos, cruelty, oppression, prejudice, or an awful death. So what a villain's really trying to do here is they're trying to fix an injustice. They're trying to fix something in their life that's not working. But as they're getting to their end goal, what they're needing that power. Whereas when you look at a hero's kind of more going, okay, how do I free myself? How do I free other people from oppression? But a villain's like, no, I've lost control. I need control. I need to fix this, and I'm the only one that knows how to do it. So that's what I really want to do is kind of take a moment and start rehumanizing our villains, but still make them as crappy as you want them to be. They can just be horrible, horrible human beings. So one of my favorite villains of all time is the Operative. And this is from Firefly. So this is our daily Firefly reference, one of my favorite shows. But what I really love about this villain is he calls himself evil. He sort of encompasses this idea of evil, but he really isn't evil. He's somebody that's hired for a job. He has very, very strong convictions, and he really does believe he's doing the right thing, that he's ridding the universe of this very dark nature by trying to get rid of, what's her name? My brain is totally gone. Somebody remembers her name? Stick it in the chat. Anyway, but he really does believe he's doing the right thing. But what I loved about him is at the very, very end, River, thank you. At the very end of Serenity, the movie, when he's actually tied down and he's faced with this video about the truth of what his mission really was and what he was really trying to destroy, is he was able to sort of shift, go, oh, okay, wait a minute, maybe I was in the wrong. So he really wasn't going for control, but at the same time he was trying to give control back to the Roberts. So anyways, I really love this character because I think he encompasses a lot of what makes a villain really complex, really fantastic. And the fact that they can change a little bit when faced with new information, but that doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly be a good guy. It just means that they're going to reorient their mission. So because obviously the villain is the hero of their own story. You know, they want to fix something, they want to take power, they want to make a better world based on their perspective, kind of how they see this bad thing, this injustice happen to them. And it can be a very small injustice, or it can be a very large injustice that, you know, really hits a lot of more people than just themselves. This right here is really, really critical. And I'm going to sort of draw on the work that I've done with I Know Why She Stayed and Authors Against Abuse. One of the things that we have to work through a lot and we discuss a lot is we have survivors that we work with, people that have been hurt, they have been beaten, they've been shamed, they've been, you know, isolated from friends and family, they've been isolated from money. And it's really, really easy to villainize the person that did this to them. Not saying that what they did was right, it absolutely was not. But if you start looking at these abusers and you really start breaking them down from a psychological point of view, you start understanding that in some cases, they're actually traumatized themselves. And they've sort of started fusing love and fear, and they don't understand that these are two separate emotions. So they use one to say that they're craving love. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, I do this because I love you, you know, as they're getting. No, they don't love you. They've learned that fear and love are actually the same thing. But it's really, really easy to just put all of these abusers sort of in that pocket of you're evil, you did horrible things, you're inhumane, but they're really not. A lot of times they're very human people. They look like you and me. They walk around with jobs, they're charming, they're charismatic, and they're innocent. So sometimes it's really good to kind of get that whole concept of evil aside and go, okay, how do I make this horrible, horrible villain, but also humanize them in a way that we can go, oh, here's where they had a chance to really do it right and they didn't. And obviously they're not going to do it. So it's really good to think about your villain as a person. They have parents, they have siblings, they have friends, they have things that they loved as a kid, things that they hated. You know, think about all those things that they grew up with and where they started cracking, where they started misdefining and really going wrong. Your villain is filled with trauma. Your hero is too, and probably has a lot more trauma than your villain, or maybe less, who knows. But your villain has suffered loss. They have suffered pain. There are things in their past that really have shifted their perspective and started redefining how they perceive justice, how they perceive righteousness, and how they perceive vengeance. So you want to start looking at sort of what are those things? What are those traumas? Where did they begin? How are they triggered? And how are they feeding into these motivations to sort of go against this hero, the bad guy in the story? And I got a little ahead of myself, but yes, villains may not know how to love. I'm not saying that they can't love, but there's definitely a line between a healthy love of animals, of family, you know, whatever it is that your villain really cares about. It could be a sibling that they've lost, you know, has turned against them. Now, then you look at how do they really define it? Are they mixing it with fear? Are they mixing it with anger? Are they really pulling these emotions together and fusing them, thinking they're acting like the good guy, but really they're harming everybody around them with these behaviors and these tactics? So let's create. So I want to start with, we're going to kind of humanize your villain a little bit. So what I start with is kind of the basics, and I'm going to give examples as we go along as well. So everything your character is going to have, they're going to have a gender or sexual identity, and they're going to have a location. And that could be a starting location. It could be where they were born. It could be sort of this, you know, you're kind of in transmutation where you're merging from one location to another. But starting with those three basics kind of gives you an idea of where to start with this. We're going to start with, okay, they have this name. It's a very powerful name. How do they feel about it? So maybe they love their name, they hate their name. Maybe they're struggling with gender identity. Maybe they feel exactly the way they want to. Maybe they live on a planet where there's like 6 different genders, which would be fantastic to read, by the way. So you can kind of just take those very, very simple basics and go, okay, how do I start with this film? How do I really want to build from the ground and start digging into trauma? So our example today is Cersei Lannister. She's going to stay with us throughout this. Her name is Cersei Lannister, obviously. That's her family name. She's female, and we're going to start her in Casterly Rock, even though the series really starts with her up in the north. And these are just very simple basics about Cersei. You know, when you're writing a fantasy story, if you're just starting at the beginning of creating, you don't really know what the hair is. You're going to figure all of that out along the way as you start building this world around your villain. So, and then for the next is, what is their mission? So we're going to think about your story as beginning, middle, and end. You know, so what is if you were kind of flipping everything on its head, how is your villain starting their story? What is their mission? What's their goal? What's their motivation? What do they want? And why do they want? How is this particular goal personal to them? And then think about at the climax, at the very end of your story, that goal is not going to be met because that hero is going to win. So is that goal at the beginning and the end, are they sort of matching up? And that will help you sort of give breath to those goals and motivations and that mission that your villain really wants to be on, and how it's subverting your hero all the way through the story. I'm having red hand here. I'm not sure what's going on. So yeah, you kind of want to look at, why are they doing this? Because there's really a reason and a decision behind every single thing. And your villains, oh, this is from Carly, my editor. She's wonderful. She's the one that was kind of like, this is where you separate a hero and a villain. Hero's endgame is often, or a villain's endgame is often warped, often a little bit unethical. It can be dehumanizing, but it's more about them taking control of a situation to fix it. And oftentimes they're taking control of the people. And then we've got Cersei here. What's her goal and mission? She wants to marry a king. Why? Because Cersei has no power. So I love her character in the way that she really sort of foreshadows sort of a woman's journey. A lot of times we don't have power in so many different things. And instead of saying, I'm going to take control of my life, or I'm going to take control of my body, she's like, oh no, I'm going to go marry a king and I'm going to take control of everybody so I never have to suffer this powerlessness. So I think that's what makes her a really strong, powerful villain. She goes right for the throat with everybody. She's not going to let anybody push her around. If you still have questions, or if something comes up, feel free to speak up. I am not monitoring Discord. So if anybody does one in there, you can feel free to move it to the chat here, or just unmute and go ahead and speak up. So the next thing we want to do is, we're kind of starting to define these villains, is we want to start digging into these trauma coping mechanisms. So a lot of times we don't see the trauma first. It's what we see is, we see behaviors, we see manifestations, we see coping mechanisms, you see patterns, quirks. I'll talk about, so one of the things that I've suffered a lot of trauma, and one of the things that started happening a few years ago is I started having seizures out of nowhere. I would be fine one minute and I would be on the ground convulsing the next minute. And the interesting thing is I didn't black out. I was fully awake, fully conscious. They'd last anywhere from 30 seconds to 7 minutes. And I went to doctors, I saw a neurosurgeon, I tried everything, and they were like, we have no idea. All we know is you don't have epilepsy. And the best determination they could figure is that somehow the trauma had started manifesting physically and causing the seizures. So all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, I have to turn around and start facing this. I have to figure out what's causing this. And this is a really good example of sometimes your villains have these quirks and they have these habits, they have these patterns. And if you start digging into them, start listing them, going, what do they do? Do they have tics? Do they have, what is it? And then once you sort of dig into those patterns of behavior, you can go, okay, well, where are these coming from? And that will help you really source the trauma. So like Cersei, she loves to show off and exert power anytime she can do it. She loves to just basically show. There's times where she holds on to her silence and she'll just watch. She'll say nothing, but you can see the wheels really working, that she's trying to figure out, how do I maneuver through this situation? She fights every exertion of power over her, big and small. Absolutely. When you've lost all power in your life to make decisions, when somebody's just pushing you around into one avenue or another, and you can't do anything about it, you're going to start fighting it. You're going to start fighting it in small ways, in muteness, in maybe, dragging your feet. If somebody's forcing you to go to one location, you're just going to walk really slowly because you really. Again, this is another character where I love watching just the small micro movements that she does throughout the series, because she really does showcase that resistance to control. And then once you kind of get a list of habits and all that kind of stuff, then you can start going, where does this come from? Why is it from this space? And this is a really great time to start digging into the history and the backstory. You want to know, okay, if they're having seizures, why are they having seizures? Okay, it's from a trauma. What was the trauma? When did it happen? Who did this to them? How did it make them feel? So you get to kind of dig into all of those fun little questions that really crack open why your villain walks on the left side of the road instead of the right, why they cross a river. Just small things, small, big, kind of make these really big, complex characters with just micro things that really help encourage and support this big mission that they're headed to. And that's what we see here. We see here, Cersei's father always kept her under control. And then she had a husband trying to keep her under control. She's always told that her love is wrong or impure, so obviously she's doubling down into it. And she is degraded as a woman so much in this series that, you really, at some point, you do start empathizing with her. Like, okay, enough's enough. She's smart. Let her just be smart, And finally, after we've started really sourcing all these traumas that are going to feed into this mission and really help create this complex character, this is what I love. What is your villain's love expression? And do they do it well? Who do they do it toward? Maybe they've got a son that they haven't seen in 10 years. That is the light of their life. Everyone else, they just, maybe they hate anybody that gets to go near their son, visit their son. And so there's going to be a lot of powerful emotions that come out of that love expression. And it's not always going to be healthy love. It's going to be unhealthy love. It's going to be expressions like, I do this because I love you, or I wouldn't have to do this if you would listen to me. As they're harming you, they're trying to tell you they love you. There's an expression called love bombing. Love bombing is it's this constant warfare of I love you, I love you, I love you. And all the while that person that's on the receiving end is just diminishing and getting smaller and smaller. Like, please just stop. Hey, I guess, It's, I don't know, it's an interesting mix when you really start mixing love with sort of these negative emotions and really watching how they play out. So definitely don't be afraid to start digging into some of those, really fusing them up and making them kind of tricky. And once again, we see this with Cersei. She can overlook the malice and cruelty in anyone she loves, but boy, somebody she doesn't care about, she will absolutely make your day miserable. And she really does protect herself. She distances herself. She's not a love bomber. She definitely distances and sort of keeps her own counsel and really shields that vulnerability. And that's it. I've got some great tools here to kind of keep you guys going. I found Story Genius to be wonderful because, you know, Lisa Crone really is, she has some other methods that she uses psychology to help you really dig into character backstories and all of the things that sort of take root and feed those habits, those missions. Rivet Your Readers is great for line editing, helps you take, you know, I was angry at him and turn it into this lush sort of sensory, just here's why I'm angry. This is how I'm feeling about it. And then you can turn one line into like 4 lines and really make your story pop. And then Jenny Chappelle has a great tool called Harness Your Inner Editor, and it's a reverse outline tool, and it's absolutely wonderful. It literally breaks everything down into 3 acts, a 3-act structure, but it does it like every 12.5%. Here's a plot point, here's a plot point, here's what it should look like, here's where the villain gets a win, and it really helps you kind of track your villain's movements through the story and see where they do get those are moving forward, kind of subverting your hero until they get to the end and they're the ones subverted. And then their Story Chat Radio. Jenny and Carly do a series of podcasts and videos, just movies and stories, and really breaking them down to story elements to help us understand how they're played out in different mediums and how we can apply them to our own stories. That was kind of fast and furious, but if anybody has any questions, concerns,
I see a question in the chat. It's from Maggie. She says, curious on if a villain can still remain a villain even if they've learned how to healthily work with their trauma.
Yes, absolutely. So trauma is very complex, tricky. With a villain, and actually with most people who have suffered trauma, what's going to happen is it's not one event that, you know, unless it's a huge event, but usually it's not just one event and then that definition just sticks with them. Trauma takes on a series of events. And when that event happens again or something adjacent. So let's take rape, for example. Okay, rape shows up in a lot of stories, and I think a lot of it is because, you know, if you look at statistics, so many women have suffered sexual assault, and we end up writing about it in our stories without trying to write about it. It just sort of comes out as like healing ourselves, but sort of putting this dark matter in our stories. But when it happens once, it's traumatizing. When it happens a second time, it's its own trauma, but then it re-triggers that first trauma. And then it continues on. And then you start adding in other traumas. You know, if somebody's isolating you from money and you can't get paid, you can't get a job because you have somebody that's controlling your life. And all of a sudden, because you don't have financial means, you can't eat. So you have to figure out how to play nice with the person that's supporting you, or you have to leave and figure out how to do it all on your own, how to get shelter, how to get money. And that's its own trauma. And then, you know, you add other complex traumas on top of that, and all of a sudden you end up with one can trigger another, and then it triggers another. And you can have a perfectly lovely day, and your landlord stops by for a surprise visit, opens up your cupboard without any permission, and all of a sudden they're violating into your life. And it triggers all of those other traumas where you've been violated, have that feeling about it. And so, yeah, absolutely. If a villain gets to the point where they're like, oh, I recognize this trauma, I understand it, I'm going to seek help, and I'm going to start dealing with it in a healthy coping mechanism, that's one trauma. That's not including the 50 other traumas that they're still dealing with. And that's not including the triggers that might regress and backslide them. So yeah, absolutely. They can still be villainous, and it can actually cause them to continue sort of spiraling down this hole of really trying to do the right thing, really pulling their hair out and going, I can get it this time, and they're still not making decisions. Because at the end of the day, it's about decisions and what feeds those decisions, what motivations, what triggers. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. I don't know if Maggie says thank you for explaining the layers because that's how I've been trying to depict while keeping them the villain. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them now.
If you have more personal questions, I can also just stick around for that. Or if you've got nothing, you guys are free to go and go enjoy the rest of the convention and stop by in this area tomorrow because Ayana Gray is going to do another session as well.